This is We the Sales Engineers podcast, show 184.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's going on, SE Nation? I am your host, Ramsey Majaba. I'll be joined by my co-host, Vinny the Beard Kanungu, and you can tell who he is by the beard, so you don't get confused with our guest, Justin Ryburn. And he's a manager at an IT company or company that provides services for IT departments. He will discuss his experience in a bit, but I want to preface this was a very good show, and we had some internet issues. So, things happen. You might find some long pauses here and there, but please, I would suggest that you suffer through it because Justin has a lot of great information as part of this. And we talk about a lot of different things, like working at a huge conglomerates like Nortel when it was around and being managed as a number versus working at a startup. And we talk about a lot of other things like proof of value versus proof of concepts, the different skill levels needed for different types of products that we're selling. So there's a lot of good information in here, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's just jump into the show. Hopefully for the last time, or I guess the first of many, third of many. How are you doing, Justin?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Well, I'm having internet issues, but hopefully it'll work from now moving forward.
Yeah, the joys of the modern times of working from a home office, right?
Yeah,
not much you can do if the internet doesn't work.
Being stuck in the basement doesn't help either. Well, I tried the hotspot. I connected through Ethernet, and now, hopefully the regular old Wi-Fi will just work.
All right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Justin Ryburn. I have about a 25-year career in, I'll just call it telecommunications, IT. Started off my career working for a number of service providers, network engineering, network operations type of roles, and then moved to the vendor side. Spent about 10 years working for Juniper Networks in various roles there. And I'm currently running the global solutions engineering team for a company called Kentik Technologies. Been here about 4.5 years. We're a startup with a growing team. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's what my current role is.
Nice. At what point did you move from network engineering and IT into sales engineering?
It's an interesting question. So I think like a lot of people in pre-sales engineering, I didn't get into this as sort of an end destination. Didn't really even know it existed when I was in college and starting my career. But I always knew I loved technology and I loved business. So I actually have 2 degrees. I have an MBA and I have a master's in IT management. So I've always kind of had this running theme in my life where I liked both sides, business and technology, and being able to combine the two. So I started off in network engineering and then went to work in pre-sales for a company who's no longer around that you might have heard of called Nortel Networks. It was in pre-sales for them. Shortly after I joined, they kind of were imploding. And so I found myself let go and went back to working in network operation, network engineering for some service providers. And then started working with a lot of the vendors that we were purchasing equipment from, and really enjoyed the interactions I had with the Juniper account team. That's how I wound up over at Juniper. I started off doing post-sales customer support type of role at Juniper for about, I guess it was the first 4 years, and then moved into sales engineering there at Juniper, and then worked up kind of through the ranks there. So kind of back and forth a little bit on my journey, but I definitely love the pre-sale side, love being out in front of the customers and helping customers solve hard technical problems.
Amazing. There's probably a whole bunch of different places we could take this just based on what you said. And I'm sure we'll dive into all sorts of different areas as the conversation goes on. But, Ramsey and I both being here in Ottawa, you mentioned Nortel Networks, which holds, I guess, a special place in Ottawa's heart to some degree. They were a massive conglomerate, and then I don't know, to some degree are still making the news with respect to where their technology has gone since, I guess.
Yeah, but, there's a lot of technology I think we don't give them credit for that we are all still using today, right?
Agreed. Yeah, they also found I believe it was in the Nortel headquarters here in Ottawa, like a whole bunch of little spy bugs and whatnot that so we have the RCMP up here in Canada, which is kind of like our secret service to a degree. And so they took over the old Nortel building as their, I don't think as their headquarters, but as like a office or as like a building that they run their operations out of. And I think they had to retrofit the entire building because they kept on finding little spy devices throughout the Nortel building. So they're still going through that whole retrofit now, years into it, just because it's not secure enough. But anyways, that aside, Nortel, huge company. I think you mentioned in our pre-convo that there's about 100,000 people that used to work there.
Yeah.
And nowadays you're working at a little bit more of a startup. Actually, before we go into maybe if there was a moment that caused you to maybe realize that the startup life was more for you, what was it like working for 100,000 plus person company?
Well, it's interesting. It has pros and cons. So, I actually made a couple trips to Ottawa to do training, and that was one of the things that was great about a company that size was they had an entire repertoire of training materials and training courses that they put you through everything from their products and their services and how they all worked, and had entire certification tracks that you could go through and get certified on their equipment. Then they also had, trainings on I'll call soft skills, although that doesn't mean they're any less critical, public speaking, writing, all kinds of different courses that they offer to their employees. There's a lot of investment in employee development. But the sort of the downside is you always felt kind of lost in the sea of other folks. And it was always hard to feel like you knew what you needed to do next and what impact your contributions were making to the company. I always tell people a story. I was standing in the airport here in St. Louis, where I'm based, about to get on a plane, and I had my Nortel jacket on. And a guy walked up to me. He goes, "Hey, do you work for Nortel?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, me too. I'm based here in St. Louis too." We started talking and trying to compare names and departments we were in. And I didn't know his department. He didn't know my department. We couldn't name one other person that we knew in common that worked at Nortel. If we both worked there, it's just amazing how large the organization was. And so, yeah, it's kind of a turning point in my career where I was like, I want to work for companies that are big enough that they have resources or at least growing, but I don't want to work for companies that are so big that I just feel like I'm not helping at all. I'm not contributing.
Sure enough. What a trip that must have been. Meet somebody from a international company, and then you finally meet somebody within your own city that works there too, and you can't even name a single person. Yeah, that would be pretty profound, I think, for me as well.
I worked for Nortel as well for a while, and the only way I was able to meet other people from other parts of the company was through the gym.
Oh yeah.
Beyond they had a nice gym there. Beyond that, I didn't know anybody. Even those I met, they would tell me I'm GNSS 3 support. Like, I have no idea what that is and what you guys do. So I was an intern there, so it wasn't really big.
Yeah, and that was exactly the experience I was missing or was mentioning was what, I named off whatever the acronym was for our department. I don't even remember it now. It's been so many years, and he named off his, and we're both like, okay, don't know what your department does. You don't know what my department does. And we'll just go on. We'll just move on.
Nice.
Awesome. Perfect. So I guess, yeah, and then you did mention that one moment was that one where, I guess, was it primarily that situation where you couldn't name, I guess, a mutual colleague, or were there any other experiences you had that further led you down the path of wanting to kind of dive into the startup world?
Yeah, I mean, I think, another sort of Nortel moment was when they did decide to let us go. I just felt very much treated like a number. Our entire department was flown to Denver and announced that we were being let go. And, they did do a nice job of taking care of us as far as severance package and that kind of stuff goes. But I didn't feel like I had anybody I could have called or anybody I could have talked to, because we were just so, disconnected from the organization. So, I guess that combined with just always being in tech, you always hear about all these Silicon Valley unicorns and these tech companies and that are exploding, and they're doing all these really cool and innovative things. And it's just, I think as an industry or as a society, we kind of paint them as being really exciting. So I'm like, I want to try that once in my career before I retire. Right? I want to give a startup a try. So
it's funny. Speaking of like treating people like numbers, there was one person I knew at Nortel that was laid off twice and hired within the 6 months just because they needed him. I'm not sure why they let go of him if they needed him, but these are horror stories that we hear about Nortel from way back when. So since then, you've worked for startups primarily?
Actually, Kentik's the first startup I've worked for. I did go to spend a little time at a service provider who's now part of the Verizon mothership. It was called XO Communications, and then worked at Juniper for, like I said, for 10 years. So still kind of worked in medium-sized organizations. Both those organizations were much smaller than Nortel, obviously. And when I joined Juniper, they were a lot smaller than they are today as well.
Yeah. So I guess with respect to working at a startup, have you found there to be, unique challenges that you didn't necessarily anticipate going into it?
Yeah, it's interesting. So one of my coworkers at Juniper, when I was getting ready to leave, I knew he had worked for a number of startups. In fact, he'd worked for a startup we had acquired, and I was asking him. I said, "What is your advice to me going to work for a startup?" Because the interesting thing about working for a startup is there's whatever the number is, 1,000, 1,000,000 things you could do in your day, and all of them arguably would provide value. But what you got to figure out is like, what is the critical, most important thing you've got to get done today, and what can wait till tomorrow? And like learning to prioritize your time, because you'll wear a lot of hats, is key to success and survival at a startup. And I've definitely found that to be true. I mean, I wore a lot of hats over the years here as the company was small, and as we started to grow, everything from, corporate recruiter to helping a little bit with HR as we onboarded new employees, to training and enablement. There's a lot of different hats that you wind up wearing.
Fair enough. And even from an employee perspective too, I mean, with any small organization, I guess there's also somewhat an onus on the employees to also wear multiple hats. Do you ever find, or did you find it challenging to kind of impart that same mentality as a leader to those same employees? And if so, kind of what did you do to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because one of the things I always try to look for when I'm hiring an SE at Kentik is, have they always worked for large companies, or if they ever worked for a startup before? Because, I'm not trying to be biased, but it's definitely been a big change for me, and it's a big change for someone else. They can be successful, but they need to make sure that they understand what they're getting themselves into. We do have some documentation. We are investing in enablement, so we are working on trying to invest in helping our teams be successful. We're not quite to the Nortel training and certification track yet, but it's better than it was when I started, as far as having things documented and having some trainings that folks can go through to try and learn the product. But there's still a fair bit, and probably always will be a fair bit of things you just got to dive in and learn on your own. So I tend to look for SEs that are what I call intellectually curious, right? Willing to go read the documentation, try and figure things out on their own. And if they hit a dead end and they can't figure it out, willing to spin it up in a lab and play with it and capture the traffic and read through a PCAP, a TCP dump of traffic, or willing to read through the logs and figure out what's going on, and have the skills and the patience, I guess, to go do things that way.
Fair enough. No, it's a good thing to look out for, I think.
I'm curious, in case you can hear me. I've seen, and we've talked to a gentleman by the name of Joseph Funk, who founds, I guess, startups. And what I've seen is that SEs are usually not the first people that are hired. They're usually the last. It's usually SDRs, salespeople, and then you talk to technical designers, software designers, to do the demos. How are startups supposed to look at sales engineering, if it's any different?
Supposed to, that's a trick question, but I'll just say that I think, I have seen that in a lot of startups. I think, and part of this kind of just speaks to where we're at as a practice within solutions engineering, sales engineering, pre-sales engineering, where I don't think it's as well understood as some of the other disciplines, right? So I think a lot of companies underinvest in it. They estimate the importance of having a built solutions engineering, pre-sales engineering team, whatever they're going to call it. And like you said, they start off trying to get by with having the people who are building the product demo the product to people, and that works okay. I think when you're really small, it's better than nothing. But what you'll quickly find is people who are writing the software spend a lot of time writing it and less time talking to the customers about what it actually needs, and so it's not quite as they don't get quite the feedback loop. They're not necessarily able to explain how the product provides customers value and how it solves problems for them in the way that the true pre-sales engineer can. I will just say at Kentik, there was actually already a pre-sales team when I got here. So all of our co-founders are heavy techies. And so they understood the value of having a pre-sales engineering team. So it was one of the first things when they started building a sales team. They hired a sales rep and a sales engineer that were a team, and kind of been that way from the very beginning. So it's, I know that's not necessarily the way it is everywhere. So I'm blessed in that way. But yeah, that's the way we've always done things here.
Amazing. Yeah, like I said, like that whole idea about calling out the idea, like how it's supposed to be done, kind of a trick question. It makes sense. Like every company's going to be a little bit different, and then how do you kind of make your people fit for whatever roles you need for that organization? That's kind of what they'll do, I suppose, in the end. So that makes sense.
I think a lot of it also depends on your product. There are some products that are being sold to customers that are built in such a way they could do this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this product-led growth term. A lot of the software companies, SaaS companies specifically, have what they call a PLG, or product-led growth strategy, where the product kind of sells itself, right? It's built in such a way that it's easy to use, easy to consume. Customers just understand it. They can just sign up on the website, enter in a credit card, and buy more of it. Think of it as kind of like the way people consume AWS to begin with, right? If you have a product like that, the pre-sales engineering team may be less critical, or may be able to at least get by with a smaller one. Our product actually tends to be much more technical. We're actually investing heavily in making it easier to use, and try to move a little bit more towards a PLG, although we're a B2B software, not a B2C software, so we'll never quite get there. But it's definitely highly technical, and it takes a lot of time from my team to work with customers to tune things and to configure things in their own environment. So we ingest a lot of data from network infrastructure, whether that's cloud infrastructure or traditional network infrastructure. And it takes a lot of time to configure that, to send data into our system, to make sure that your data is accurate. And so it's a little bit time consuming. So it definitely needs a little higher touch than maybe some other products do. So what would be right for us as far as an organization and structure and team size wouldn't necessarily be the same for other companies. So you really got to know your product, your customer, your market to really be able to answer that. What size team do I need?
Makes sense.
Given your current product, and if you were to start building the sales team from scratch, like sales and SEs, how would you go about, like, what's the right way to build a team at a startup? When do you hire your first salesperson, and when do you hire your first SE? You mentioned Kentik did it together, but what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I came to Kentik post product launch. They were out of stealth, and the product was in the market. But, obviously there's a period of time, if you think of it from like, initial seed funding of a concept of an idea, through to IPO or acquisition, there's a point at which you've built a product, you're ready to go to market with the product. And you've, I guess, built at least you've gotten to the point where you've proven that there's some value to this product, right? There's a product market fit, I guess is the right term for that. That's probably the point at which I see most companies hiring their first sales rep and their first SEs, when they get to the point where they're like, yeah, we've iterated on this idea and moved from a concept to something that we actually are now getting customers who are willing to pay for it. And we can now articulate what the value is that this product is bringing to our customers. And for a lot of companies, that takes a few iterations, right? The initial vision of what they thought it was going to be and what it really winds up being, go through a couple changes before they finally get to that.
Fair. Actually, just with respect to, I guess, the skill set that an SE may need, would you say, or at least in your experience, has it differed from even company to company within the same industry, I suppose?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, a lot of companies that have, a product that's easy to onboard and doesn't require a lot of customization, doesn't require a lot of changes and so forth. You can get by with, SEs that maybe are more on the business side, more on presentation skills, and spend their time, talking to customers, articulating the value of it. And then when the customers try it and they're actually using the software, they're much less hands-on, right? They may answer a few questions here and there, but they're not spending as much time doing deep technical things. They're spending a lot more of their time, doing demos and building out PowerPoint presentations that articulate the value of the product and customize those to the particular customer that they're working with, and speaking in the language that the customer understands and so forth. So we do a little bit of that, but we're in my team more hands-on and spending more time on the product and less time on presentations and so forth.
Yeah, I love that response. Mostly because like, I don't know, I feel like there was another question I had, or that we had rather, where it kind of had to do with the idea of kind of how sales engineering maybe evolved for you as you've moved from organization to organization with respect to kind of your understanding of sales engineering, or like what the perfect SE really is, I suppose. But really, I think the response you just gave is kind of ideal, where it's that, there isn't necessarily a perfect SE for every single location, whereas, every location kind of has their fit for what their perfect SE kind of looks like. And yeah, it may change over time. It kind of has to do with the product, the industry, the specific nuances of the organization, and all about just finding what works. That was a really cool response.
And it makes it really difficult when you're hiring and building an SE team like I am, because you can't just assume that if it says, SE on their resume, that the experience that they've had at their previous company is going to translate well here, right? Because like you said, each company is a little bit different, and the way the skills that you need to be successful as an SE at each company is slightly different. So you kind of got to vet another layer of detail below to make sure that they have the skill set, and what they want to do is going to be a fit too, right? What they're excited about, what they're passionate about is going to be a good fit.
Definitely.
So based on the description that you just gave, like I can hear some pushback in my brain, whether it's from me or from people I've heard. Isn't that more of a description of a salesperson, someone who just does presentations and works on presentations?
I think it depends on the organization. Yeah. I mean, some organizations, the sales, I kind of think of it as on a continuum, right? I mean, you have the salesperson who starts completely on the business, is doing things like negotiating contracts and all of the, pricing stuff that a lot of SEs don't get involved in. You get to the middle, there's overlap, right? There's I don't know what you call it, gray area, but there's definitely overlap where arguably a rep could do it, arguably an SE could do it when you're talking about presentations and value proposition and things like that. And then you go to the other end where it's the heavy, like helping the customer configure things and troubleshooting and reading through logs and a lot of the heavy technical stuff that obviously is going to fall to the SE. So I think it depends on, even within our company, we have teams where that kind of handoff changes, varies depending on the teams and kind of how they like to do things, how they kind of structure themselves, and how they're organized. We have some teams where the SEs don't get involved in anything discussing licensing or pricing, and then we have some where the SEs are very heavily involved in that because they can help size the environment, right? So it just kind of varies based on the skill sets and quite honestly how the company wants to organize things. But I would say SEs kind of run a gamut from a skill set from highly business and value focused to highly technical focused and everywhere in between.
Yeah, no, great point. Also, something else around just like how businesses maybe want to orient themselves or the resources. I guess it has to do with a topic that we've kind of maybe primed for today's conversation, which has to do kind of with proof of concepts to a degree. So a lot of companies might have different methodologies too around how they use their SEs, what activities they're involved in, everything you just described, maybe with respect to their skill sets and their core competencies and whatnot. But a lot of teams sometimes go about these proof of concepts maybe blindly, where they might be setting up these demos and they might have an objective of some sort with respect to what a prospect wants to achieve, but they're just kind of, showing off something and maybe not following up as effectively as they potentially could. You kind of have a different view on proof of concepts to a degree, or maybe you framed it a little bit differently. Do you mind talking about that a little bit more and kind of what got you to that?
Yeah, and I think this is another one of those things that kind of evolves over time, right? When you're early on and your product doesn't have a lot of market traction, it's not well known in the market, you wind up getting into a lot of those, you don't really have a lot of choice, right? You're spending a lot of the time educating the market, educating the buyer as much as you are defining the success and working through a well-defined test plan to execute to get a deal closed. In an ideal world, assuming you have some market traction and people know generally what your product does and what its value is coming into the door, you really want to do what I call a proof of value, not a proof of concept. And it sounds like we're splitting hairs here, but what that really in my mind means, the difference between that is we're not spending our time doing testing to prove out that some concept exists and that it could potentially work. We're proving that this product that already exists has value and that it solves real world business problems for the customer. And ideally, you want those defined up front before you even launch into the testing, right? By the time you've done a demo of the product, you've had a few initial conversations with the customer about what pain points brought them to you, why they're talking, why they're talking to you, quite honestly. You want to sit down and map out, okay, well, here's the business problems that you articulated to me that you have. Here's the use cases that we have brought to the table with customers similar to yours in the past and solve these business problems for them. Let's develop a success criteria that helps us map those two together, and we'll execute that as part of our proof of value, just to prove to you, Mr. Buyer, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, that this product solves the business problems that you said you needed to, and then we'll move from there, to purchase. So the more well-defined that is, the better you're going to be at being successful and not having your proof of values drag on forever. One of the areas that I think the SE teams can really help, if we do a good job of doing that and working collaboratively with the customer through that, is shorten the sales cycle in that, proof of concept, proof of value, whatever you're calling it, in that stage of the opportunity. Because I've seen, and even, here at Kentik early on, we spent a lot of time in what we call proof of concepts, which we're really trying to find the problem, right? We're like, we know we have this product, let's spend some time and show it to you. And we're trying to find enough value in testing, exploratory, to try and get a deal done, which, sometimes you don't have a choice. If the customer doesn't have enough pain, that's better than nothing, but it's not something that is going to be repeatable. It's not something that's going to move quickly through a sales cycle to get a deal done.
Many customers just want to try things out. They don't want to do success criteria. They don't want to talk to you. Just give me the product so I can try it out in my lab. And how do you go from working with someone like that to convincing them that it will be better if we understand, if we have success criteria? And, please don't be pissed off. We're doing this for your benefit as much as ours.
Yeah, so we offer a trial as well, right? So we don't turn people away that want to kick the tires on their own. What we really try to do is, if we're going to invest the time in doing a testing, we want to know what it is we're trying to get out of it, what we're trying to test, what the value is that we're trying to prove out of this. If we're going to invest time in it and they're going to invest time in it, we're going to work collaboratively through this process to a purchase. We need to define what that looks like. That being said, if a customer, to your point, just says, hey, I just want to learn more about your product, I'm at the point in my sort of evolution or my purchasing cycle where I just want to know what else is out there in the market. I'm trying to figure out what Kentik does and what these other 8 tools do. So I kind of figure out the ecosystem and what fits in where. Great. Hey, we have a lot of, materials we can send you. We have videos. You're welcome to sign up for a free trial. You can kick the tires yourself and try it out. We're happy to answer any questions, but that's a very different engagement and a very different point in the buyer's journey that person is, versus someone who has a real business problem. They have a budgeted project they're working on, and they want to, they actually want to test the product towards a purchase. Right. And neither one is bad. We just want to be, as sales teams, we want to be able to separate one from the other, because that'll make our forecast to our business much more accurate.
Have those trial periods. From my experience, if I give my customers something, a trial, they don't use it until the trial ends, and they come back and ask for more licenses, and I have no idea what they're doing. Could be something unrelated to anything that they're actually trying to solve. Would it be okay for them? Is it okay for them to just do that and come back to us later and say, hey, we can do it? Or are we trying to do something differently?
Yeah, I don't really know how to solve for that. We've definitely seen that a lot too, right? We'll have people who sign up for a trial. Our trial's 30 days. So 30 days will expire. The trial gets shut off, and then they go in and it tells them it's expired. And they're like, hey, I need more time. You haven't logged in 30 days. I don't really have a good way to solve for those. I think a lot of those people are still very early in their buying journey, right? If they haven't engaged in 30 days, they haven't logged back in, they haven't spent the time to play around with it. My take is usually, unless there's some other circumstances that we can talk to them about, typically it comes down to they're just kind of curious about what we do and just signed up for it and then got busy and haven't had a chance to come back and learn about it. Honestly, those are probably ones where we're better off getting on the phone and doing a demo of it, right? As opposed to them continuing to kick the tires in the trial, because then we can answer questions. We can show them things they may not have had time to play around with in the trial on their own time. And we can build a custom demo that works to show them the parts of the product that might speak to whatever it is they're trying to evaluate.
Makes sense. I guess in your efforts to kind of make things more sustainable for an organization's operations, were there ever any unforeseen trade-offs that you encountered with respect to doing so, whether it be just like internal pushback and maybe you're not as tight with your employees, or I don't know, maybe there's some department that was part of a process, they're no longer part of it, and so maybe they're feeling a little salty about that. Like, was there any sort of experience like that you ever had to encounter? And if so, how did you work with that?
You talk about towards when we move towards more of a repeatable process. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a bit of a shift in a mindset to try and be more prescriptive in doing these success criteria and so forth. So, whether it was, people on my team or people in other parts of the organization, there was definitely some, I don't know as much of it was pushback as much as there was skepticism that can we really do this? Can we really be successful? Is this just going to upset people that we're trying to define the success? Kind of back to Ramsey's question about what if customers just want to, kick the tires and play around. They're not really interested in engaging with a high pressure sales team that's trying to push them towards buying this product. So there were definitely some skeptics when we started doing this, but I think, part of it is just proving that it can be done. Part of it is defining, again, like I said, what we mean by proof of value and what type of engagements we're going to do that process versus just letting a customer do a trial and maybe we do a demo and we take sort of another path because they're in an earlier stage of their journey. We were lumping all of that into proof of concept previously and overloading that term. And that's why I think a lot of people thought about people who are like, I don't really know. I don't have a budgeted project. I don't really know what I want to get out of this. I couldn't tell you what success looks like, even if you asked. How are we going to put them through a quick POV? How are we going to shorten that cycle? And they don't even know what they're trying to get out of it. My answer to that is, well, that's not the type of customer, not the type of engagement that I'm talking about here. That's still going to be kind of outside of this box. But for the ones that we do know what we're trying to solve, we do know what their business problems are, we do know what our product does to address those problems. Those are the ones we're talking about where we want to be more prescriptive and more repeatable, define those success criteria up front so that we can move them quickly through the stages.
Fair enough. That makes sense. That's funny how important knowing one's requirements are on both sides of the table, whether it be like a vendor trying to know exactly what it is that they're, I guess, what they need to do to speak to a company and solving their issues, or even just knowing like what the company's issues are. And obviously for a company that's looking for a vendor to be able to articulate those issues properly so that there could be that match. Makes sense. Yeah. That's cool.
I've heard a lot about working for startups. I've never worked for a startup myself, but because you wear too many hats, sometimes it could lead to burnout. From what I've never experienced it because I don't work for startups. Is there a process that people can create, especially for sales engineers who are usually pulled in a million different directions, to actually sustain their growth and make sure that, I'm not burnt out, I'm actually energized and happy to be doing this job?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very real concern, I think, in any company, but especially at startups, because there is, like I said, a lot of hats that you wear. There are a lot of demands on your time. There's always going to be more that could be done than you could ever get done in whatever hour work week, depending on how many hours you want to put in. I think a lot of it is on the management team to kind of keep their finger on the pulse of how the team's doing, how they're feeling. Especially in the COVID era where people are working from home, you don't get to see them in person. You don't get to interact with them in person. I also think, at least for myself, I tended to work more hours when COVID first hit, just because I'm like, well, I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to commute. I'm not on an airplane. I'm not in a hotel. I'm sitting in my home office. So, walk by and check my email before I go to bed or, whatever. So you definitely wind up putting more hours in. So that was one of the things I was, as a company, we were concerned about, and definitely myself, I was concerned about for my team, is keeping an eye on, burnout as COVID hit. So I think, it's sort of on the leadership to help with that. I think as an employee, though, you also have to you have to have some boundaries, right? You have to know when you're getting close to burnout and be able to pull back a little bit and take the time off to rest and relax and unwind and not let yourself get to that point. That's, at least for me personally, that's been kind of maturing as as an employee or as an SE, if you want to put it that way. Is I always felt like, I don't know, I kind of had this hero mentality where it's like, hey, it's a badge of honor that that I can work 100 hours a week and do that week after week after week. And it's like, but if you let yourself go to the point where you do so many hours that you burn out, that's not being a mature employee either, right? Like there's some balance in the middle, that being able to work and being able to work at a load in a level that's sustainable is actually maturing. I don't know if that quite answered the question, Ramsey. I'm not. But
it does. I just want to follow up with, like, what is the role of the organization in creating processes? Like, as a sales engineer, if I want to do a proof of value, and if I have, like, I'm working with 10 salespeople and all of them want to do a proof of value, is there a process where I can eliminate some? Like, how do I create that sustainable process so I can keep going with my job?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little different at Kentik than I know that it is a lot of other companies from talking to other SE leaders. So I'll answer how I do it, and then I'll answer how I hear other SE leaders tell me they do it. So again, we're blessed to have a one-to-one mapping of AEs to SEs pretty much to this day. Now, as we grow and we get more of this process done for proof of values, we may break that model, but for today, we're one-to-one. So part of each quarter or each half year planning that the sales reps and the SEs do is they figure out, okay, for our territory, how do we want to attack this and how do we want to invest our time, right? Maybe that the reps are spending more time on different accounts than the SEs are because they have ones that they're doing prospecting, they're doing outreach, they're doing kind of top of the funnel activities to try and get conversations going, whereas the SEs are spending more of their time on these 3 to 5, whatever it is, proof of values that they're working on. But that's sort of a conversation that I'll give some input to, but I expect the rep and the SE to kind of decide, how do we want to spend our time, right? Because we can't do everything. Which ones are the ones we think are the most real, that the customers know what their success criteria are, they know what their business pain points are, it's a budgeted opportunity. Those are the, obviously the ones that come to the top that we want to invest our time in. Now, a lot of companies don't have the luxury that I have of having the one-to-one mapping, so they have more of a pooled resource type of setup where they may have 2 or 3 reps to one SE, and so you got to come up with some sort of metrics or some sort of way to qualify the opportunities, similar to what I was just talking about for territory planning, where you figure out, like, okay, which ones, is it budget, or is it a multi-metric? How do we come up with a criteria for how we want to initiate a proof of value and put an SE resource on a particular opportunity? And that it's a very difficult conversation to have, because reps always want the SE on their deals, right? And they always feel like their deals are the most important ones. But a lot of that I think also goes back to having a good relationship with your sales leadership too. I have a really good relationship with my peer who runs the sales side of things, as well as our boss, who's the chief revenue officer. And so, we're having these conversations earlier in the cycle, not, when a deal comes up. So I think that relationship and that rapport is really important to those type of conversations.
Yeah, I could even just kind of pitch in with I guess just what's the confirmation of that, of what you just said there. At least in my experience, my first experience as an SC, I was a sole SC working with a sales team of like, I think it started off with around 15, 20, probably rose up to around 30 or so, if not a little bit more, and eventually got a couple other SCs on the team as well. But one of the things that we did, especially, even while I was by myself, but as we kind of grew as well, and kind of just as SC team was needed more and more and more, was exactly what you described. So we had criteria as to, like, all right, if you want to have like a real proof of concept, or we're spinning up a new environment for your prospect with their type of mock data or whatever, we need to make sure we have Z. We need to be up to this quality at least. We need to know, I don't know if we had a budget requirement in there at least, but the conversations have gotten so far that we had, at least what we found worked for us was that we gave visibility to the sales team to all the other calls that we were on, so that they'd even see the fact that, oh yeah, okay, so Vinny has calls with this person, this person, this person at these various times. I know just by the nature of this sales rep that they work on bigger deals and they're going to need a little bit more time. I won't be able to steal Vinny away from that, but I see that he's a little bit more open on these days, so I'll try to make it work around that, which really has to do with not only having a good relationship with the sales leadership, but obviously with those that you're working with, the salespeople on the ground as well, so that they then kind of gain that respect for you and then kind of work their schedule around yours, because they know that you're busy and they have respect for you.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's definitely changes from, like you were mentioning, it changes from company to company, from SE to SE. All right, so it is time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions we ask almost every guest, and I'd love to know what you think about it. Benny, you want to start us off?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, just kind of turned into a transformer. There's a lot about sales engineering, and even a little bit about leadership as well. What do you love about being a pre-sales or sales engineering leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the pre-sale side of things, why I do that versus any other department within the company is I really enjoy, like you said, combining the technology and the business, right? Being able to not only understand the technology and be somewhat of an expert on the technology, although I think there's always more you can learn, but being able to apply that to business, right? Being able to solve real world business problems for customers, and being able to be out in front of customers and hear, be on the front lines and hear what's working and what's not working. I just love that engagement. On the leadership side, I think, just being able to then take my love for this role and this kind of part of the organization, and build a team, coach a team, help them be successful at doing the same thing, being their champion internally, and getting them the resources they need to be successful, and being able to raise the awareness and the visibility of them and what they're doing internally. That's one of my favorite parts of the job.
That's awesome. Ramsey, I don't know if you froze there.
I think I am, but I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, looks like we may have lost you. Oh, yeah, you're back.
All right. So, all right. Follow-up question: what would you change about the leadership role?
Ooh, what would I change about the leadership role? I don't really, I don't really have something I can think of I would change. Like I said, I think I'm very fortunate. We have a big team. We invest heavily in it, whether that's in the headcount, whether that's in enablement and training and so forth. There's obviously never enough hours in the day to do everything, but I think, from talking to a lot of other SE leaders at a lot of other companies, I'm very, very fortunate with the relationship I have with my sales leadership partners and with how we've invested in the team. So I really can't think of anything. I'm sure, there might be some minor things, but
Glad to hear that.
by and large, it's going really well.
That's a good answer. I'd say throughout the call, you've imparted quite a bit of wisdom throughout, and just good insights throughout as well. Oh, sorry, kind of. All right, I'll just jump in. My apologies. Seems to be a little bit of a lag there. So you've imparted a lot through the call. Are there any books or tools or resources that you've read along the way that have, I guess, got you to the conclusions you have, or is there anything you'd recommend people dive into?
I'm a big fan of John Kerr's materials. So when I was at Juniper and was, moving from post-sales to pre-sales, I read his book, and then he came in and did a whole training for us. So Mastering Technical Sales is the book, and then he has a whole video series. I actually like it so much, I bought all the videos for my team. We have them in our enablement tool. So I don't make it mandatory, but I highly recommend when we hire new SEs that they go through that material. So I'm a big fan of that stuff. He also recently wrote a book. I had it here, but I've moved it to my bookshelf for SE managers that is also very well done. So I'm a big fan of that. Chris White, if you guys are familiar with him, I forget what he used to call himself Demo Doctor. He's rebranding himself under something else, but he does a really nice job. We had him come speak at our sales kickoff back in January about qualification, asking good questions that then leads into tying those tidbits that you get back into your demo, so that your demos are very targeted towards the value, the problems that the customer articulated when you did that qualification meeting. It was very well done.
Amazing. Yeah, big fans of those two. Been on the show too.
Yeah, yep. It's a small industry. There's only so many resources for pre-sales. There's thousands of books out there for selling and negotiating, but actual pre-sales engineering part of it, there's only a handful. So
definitely a very tightly knit community, without a doubt.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think with Rance, I'm not sure if you're having issues with the audio, but I am happy to jump in if you are.
Go ahead.
Oh no, you're back. You're back.
Well, all right. Let's go before the internet really blows up. Is there a habit that you're working on today to improve, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life?
A habit. Yeah, I mean, I think just time management. We talked about this a little bit, but when you work for a startup, there's never enough hours to do everything you want to do. So you have to prioritize. I think a lot of that is just organization and time management. Just being very disciplined and coming up with good organization of to-do list, email, Slack. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that communication is done, and trying to keep those organized and track what needs follow-up and on what timeline. That's something that I've definitely had to improve on over the last 4.5 years being here, just trying to keep everything organized and on track. So that's been, I'll call it a habit that I've been working on developing.
Okay, nice. All right, last question of the day. If people want to reach out and connect with you, Justin, where can they do that?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter. I don't do a lot on Twitter, but people can feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm just Justin Ryburn on there. Or they're always welcome to send me an email. It's jryburn, RYBURN at Kentik, KENTIK.com.
Perfect. So we'll make sure to include links to those in the show notes.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate your time today and your patience.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on. Great chat.
Of course, likewise.
Thank you, Justin, for coming on. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. It was a long episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I ask this almost every podcast, but if you got something out of this, please make sure to share it on LinkedIn. You don't have to share the podcast, just comment on the link on the post that I put. And if you don't follow me on LinkedIn, maybe you should follow the company name, We the Sales Engineers, or follow me personally, Ramzi Marjaba. I thought this was a great show, and I am biased because I'm part of the show, but Justin carried it. He did a great job, and his perspective I just loved. And the fact that there's a sliding scale of sales and engineering, the skill level of what SEs could have and should have, and a perfect SE for one company could be really horrible for another company. Like a salesy SE would be very bad in a company that requires a very technical SE who's going to be doing configurations and debugging and all that in front of a customer. Whereas that techie SE would be really bad when they're supposed to be doing more selling. So find the role that's right for you, I guess. If you like carrying multiple hats, startups might be a good place for you. If you don't like being treated like a number, not all big organizations do that, but many that I've been in, and I've been in a few large organizations throughout my career, there is definitely a management by number where like someone higher up would tell the boss, like, hey, you need to let go of one person because reasons. We have way too many numbers. And so they have to go and find a number that's good for them. So these are all things that we see throughout our careers, and it is what it is. We just live with it and we move on. If there are any topics, like I've covered, like we've had 184 podcasts so far. We've covered a variety of topics. If there are some topics that you think I haven't covered and should, please reach out and let me know. If there are any specific questions that you have, I can do an Ask Me Anything episode where I just answer questions that you have. And if that's interesting, reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can either send me the question or send me a video of yourself asking the questions. We'll have to figure that out as we go along. But ask me, like, I'm here, you know. And for some reason, I only answer the people who ask me questions. So be one of those. Anyways, I'm not going to belabor the point anymore. Thank you for listening. And for Binny, this is Ramsey signing off.